Welcome to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. I can't believe it's September. I'm just back from my vacation, which both feels like it was 3 months ago and also like I was gone forever. So I guess good and bad, right? While I was away, NACAC made a formal announcement that we are officially part of their NACAC podcast network. So if anyone is joining us as a result of learning about the podcast, because we are now part of that network, welcome. We hope you'll find interesting stuff here, and you might not learn anything new, but hopefully you will, or maybe you'll learn some additional things, more nuance to things that maybe you knew a little bit about. But we're going to be doing a lot of Q&A later on in the show today. But before we get to that, we're going to be talking about marketing. This time of year, colleges are sending out a lot of mail. As the parent of a senior, we are getting a lot of mail in this house. In fact, my husband said the other day, like, I hope these colleges aren't touting how they are reducing their carbon footprints because we are getting so much mail that they can't possibly be, and is a good point. So here I am joined by my colleague Kenan Dick. Kenan is, and I have worked together here at College Coach for a number of years. We actually joined together, but he's also a former admissions officer at Swarthmore, at Drexel, and at Johnson State. Hi, Kenan.
Hello, how are you today?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks so much for being here. I really
Sure.
appreciate it. So when we decided that we wanted to talk about marketing and how this all works, we went out and found someone on the team that we thought would be really well versed to talk about it. And you're it because you were involved at marketing at a couple of your former colleges. Tell us a little bit about what that looked like for you at those schools.
Sure. I think starting with Swarthmore, I think that their process was fairly standard compared to many schools, in which they would purchase a whole group of names, usually directly from the PSAT for that junior class when they became available in November. And we would give them the parameters that we were looking for, geographic parameters, score parameters, self-reported GPA, etc. And from that group of students, we would send out a direct mail campaign as well as an email campaign, and see if they would respond to that and develop interest in Swarthmore. At Drexel, we had something similar, but we had kind of a multi-pronged effort. So we had something akin to Constant Contact, where we're sending out emails on a regular basis. We're sending out university-specific information, but also college-specific, and even sometimes, we'll have, oh, this event is taking place on campus. If you're interested, please come. And we had what was called a P count, which is a personal inquiry count. So
Mm,
every time you contacted the school, responded to one of these emails, had posted a question, whatever it might be, that all got recorded. And so that would have an effect on not only admissions, but sometimes scholarship offers. If a student had a really high P count, that was a demonstration of a higher level of interest and a higher yield rate than for students who had a lower P count.
right, right.
So those were kind of like, I think kind of the general thrust for each one of those two schools. But Drexel certainly had the much more sophisticated group of efforts.
Well, right, which brings up, for me, my immediate thinking there is that Drexel and Swarthmore have fairly different acceptance rates, right? So
Mhm.
Swarthmore is certainly getting a lot of students who are interested and turning many, many of them away. Drexel is probably working a little harder to get students interested in them and admitting more of them who do have that interest. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that what you find with the more selective schools is that it's not a general marketing campaign, right? It's more, these are our needs, and it's a small subset of types of students that we're looking for. And so, if we need more engineers that year, then that's the group that we're going to be focusing on.
Got it.
So it's usually it's not a general purpose marketing campaign as it was at Drexel, where at Drexel it was, we need applications, right?
Right.
And we also want to make sure that we're accepting the students that are more likely to come.
Hmm.
And so they had a whole matrix of information about the student when they were deciding on who to give grants to, who to admit, based on yield rates, et cetera, and where we wanted to kind of have all of that shake out based on the institutional needs.
Right. So when you think about it from that perspective, one of the things that I know you and I experience a lot and our colleagues experience a lot is we have students who we're meeting with and they come very excited because they got a piece of mail from a school. Often when they are very excited about this, it's from a school that is incredibly selective. And I would put Swarthmore in that category. And their immediate gut reaction is, wow, I can't believe this school wants me. And, and so I would love to get your thoughts on, should that be the gut reaction that they have, that this school really wants me?
The honest answer is maybe.
Right, right.
And the hard part is that when you're making these decisions from the marketing side of things, you have very limited information about that student, right?
Right.
So basically, you have a GPA or a self-reported GPA. Who knows how solid that is? And you also have the PSAT scores.
Right.
So if there's a lot of variation, and so you might have a student who has a B average and is at Petty School and a really strong student at that school, or a B plus average and at Interlake, and that's not a strong GPA for their school, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of variation in there that we can't necessarily control for, and so we're kind of doing it at the back end.
Right.
But there are definitely going to be students that are probably not terribly viable in the application pool that do get some of these mailings. Yeah.
Right, right. Well, and I think the point that you hit on is really the most important one, which is it is so limited, the information they have. So, and on the flip side, right, think about the students with spectacular grades and potentially super interesting things that they're involved in outside of the classroom, who either didn't take the PSAT or didn't really do well on the PSAT for whatever reason, but wind up presenting incredibly strong applications when it's time, and they're very interested in Swarthmore. So they may never have even been part of your targeted marketing group, and yet they've emerged as a really strong candidate versus somebody who maybe scored really well on the PSAT, had okay grades. And then when you looked at the application, they didn't really do very much. Their essays maybe didn't show a whole lot of ability, writing ability, or a lot of thought, or they didn't put a lot of time into the application. There's so much more that goes into whether or not you ultimately admit a student that really I would encourage people to think about this as just like you are entering the widest part of the funnel at this point. And
exactly right.
Right, you're just trying to make them aware, hey, you might not have known this, but we have engineering at Swarthmore. I'm not sure that engineering is what comes to mind necessarily when you think of Swarthmore. And so I could see how that would be something really important that you guys would want to market about.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great way to think about it, is that that's the widest part of the funnel. And there's a lot of selection that happens after that point. So, and even with some of our on-campus programs, there was, essays that they would write, there would be transcripts that they would send in just for those types of programs. And so those were based on much more solid types of information than you get with any of the PSAT or, and it's not just the PSAT where you do have those scores, but also, there are different magazines that we would advertise in and things of that nature. And those would produce those types of leads as well. And in those cases, you had even less information about the student.
Right, right. Well, and I would assume you're also marketing to the students who have added themselves to your mailing list, right? So they have already indicated an interest. And so you're going to, of course, reach out to them because you know that they're interested in you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And try to cultivate that interest even more.
Right.
So, at Drexel, if there was a student who was interested in our engineering program and they were putting on an open house, then we would market to those students directly about those events and see if that would add to their P count, right? If they'd be interested enough to come see it.
Right.
So that's definitely part of it. I mean, once you kind of go another step or two beyond that funnel, then, we're still kind of engaged in that campaign, but we're not quite to the point where we're at an application and can see kind of the full student.
Right, right, exactly. And I think that is really the key. And Any thoughts? I don't know if we should have talked about this beforehand, but a lot of schools will, one of their big marketing things, and I know because somehow they're coming all to my email address, are
Mhm.
all the like, we have a special offer, a special application that your child can fill out. It's a priority application,
Mhm.
um, you know, just for your child. Did you do any of that at Drexel specifically?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And so, I mean, the whole idea behind that type of campaign was just to make it as easy as possible to have an application come in, right?
yep,
And so, basically, try to eliminate any barriers that that student might feel in the application process. And part of the reason for that is that, and this is the case at a lot of colleges and universities, is that applications, even if they're not the type of student that you want to eventually take, all of those applications help your numbers and they help you in US News and World Reports
right.
and those types of calculations. So the more applications they get, the perceived um, value of that school or interest in that school, and that helps everything from admissions all the way down to their bond rating for Moody's, right? So there's a lot of repercussions to that number, and so it's not always just trying to create that funnel, but you also want a wide top to that funnel if you can as well.
Right, right. And just a shout out here to why we are in many cases down on ratings and rankings here. And, people love US News and World Report, but what you need to recognize is that when you bemoan the fact that colleges are trying so hard to generate more and more applications every year, that a big piece of that, applications that they will turn away, a huge piece of that is how much better that helps them look on US News and World Report. So essentially, we're turning over this huge important thing and allowing a magazine, which by the way only now exists just for these rankings, to have such incredible influence and impact over how admissions is done. And it's not a positive, people. It's not a
Right.
positive. So,
Exactly.
I just wish we could all get away from the rankings. I really, really do. But all right, moving on.
Hmm.
You mentioned the P score, and of course, as you're talking, I'm thinking about my own child who I've been encouraging to open emails, and now I'm thinking, have I encouraged this enough? I talk about this all the time with my students, but you're getting all this mail. What should you be doing with it? Assuming it's a school you're interested in. If it's a school you're not interested in, by all means, toss it,
Right.
recycle it if you can, right?
Hmm.
But if it's a school you're interested in, what should students be doing with this mail?
So I think if there's a way to register your information, and so it's whether it's following a link or sending in a card or whatever it might be, that by doing that, you're connecting yourself with that institution in a way that may be useful for you as the applicant as well, right?
Right.
So if there's a virtual program that's taking place, Bucknell did one back in the spring for their engineering students, and it was a really good program, and they had breakout rooms with their current students, so prospective students could talk to them and find out more about what that program felt like, what the workload was like, and why they like Bucknell, why they choose that program, and it helps them. So when they sit down to write that why Bucknell essay that they need to write, then
Yes.
they've got real details and can make a personal connection to that school. So those opportunities, I think, can be valuable. But I think you're absolutely right. For the ones, for those schools that you have no interest in, no, you're not going to apply to, don't bother, right?
Right.
It's just going to increase the number of mailings that you get. However, if you do have a mild interest or a more specific interest in school, it can open up opportunities for you as well.
Right, absolutely. So, and especially in these days when it's much more difficult to visit, and you may not be able to do that, that's also a way to kind of at least try to make up for that fact. And, again, I'm thinking about the fact that my son went and visited a few schools, but didn't do an official information session and tour because they weren't available.
Mhm.
And in my head, well, he's visited, he's seen it, and I'm realizing they don't know that. So, at a few of the schools, I think they don't care. They're not worrying about that. But I know that at some of the schools they are. And so, when he gets home today, we'll be talking a little bit more about how he needs to be doing this. Uh,
Mhm.
so this is a good reminder for me. For our listeners, if they're interested, so back in April 22nd to be exact. And so if you wanted to go back and watch this, the podcast, that we did a whole hour-long podcast on who gets in and why year in college admissions with Jeff Salingo, who wrote this book. And if you're curious and want to learn more about the whole marketing piece and how this evolved over time, I think it's pretty fascinating. The entire first chapter of his book is actually devoted to that. So if you haven't read the book, I would encourage you to pick it up and read that if you want to learn more. Any final thoughts on the whole marketing stuff and whether or not to get excited when you see that mail from a college, or, kind of how to properly think about it?
Well, actually, one anecdote that I think is kind of an illustration of this is that one of the students that I work with at Drexel, very high P count, very high interest in the school. And when she went to, her mom was a single parent, affording the school was not going to be easy for them.
Right.
And so, they went into that negotiation phase and said, we just need, this type of money. But because she had such a high P count,
Mm-hmm.
and we knew she was really, really interested in the school, that helped sway that argument.
Yeah.
Right. So she got the money that she needed in order to be a student the next year. So it's more than just kind of the admission side of things that this can have an effect on. So, again, if you're really interested in the school, these are good things to follow up with.
Absolutely. Totally agree. And yeah, I think just some great insight here. And Ken and I really appreciate you joining the show and sharing all of that insight with us.
It's been my pleasure.
All right, awesome. All right, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we are getting to your questions. So you couldn't possibly go away because we might answer your question. So please stick around.